What time is it? Fight!
Welcome to the MMA Podcast.
Check this out.
Get all the latest news, interviews, and stars of the MMA world. Hosted by yours, John Boy McElroy. So tune in, everyone, right here to the MMA Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Martial Arts Chat Podcast, and in this episode we are running another MMA Roundtable which will look back to UFC 193 Holm versus Ronda Rousey and getting the panel's predictions ahead of UFC 194 McGregor versus Aldo. On the panel today we are joined by Mr. Bob Carson of the Carson's Corner Podcast and Don Wilson of Fight Talk Scotland. Gentlemen, thank you very much for giving us your time today here on Martial Arts Chat. We'll just cast our minds back first to the 14th of November. We had the largest attendance for a UFC show in Melbourne, Australia. It was UFC 193 and it was headlined by the women's bantamweight title fight, Rousey versus Holm, and it was a shocker of a result and a finish which we'll get to later, guys. But first we'll be going through a few select fights from that main card, and we'll just start first up with a look at the middleweight contest which was between Uriah Hall and Robert Whittaker. Bob Carson, I'll come to you first, sir. We had Uriah coming off that huge knockout win over Gegard Mousasi, and for this fight he stepped in for the injured Michael Bisping. Didn't get the W in this contest, but what was your thoughts for this fight? How did you see it going down?
He's one of these fighters that can knock out his opponent at any time, and so he comes in, and I just was very, very impressed with Robert Whittaker. I thought he basically controlled the fight wherever it went. He out-muscled Uriah, he outstruck Uriah, I think, and it was a real dominant performance for Robert Whittaker, who was coming off of 4 straight victories in the UFC, following his loss to Stephen Thompson last year, and it couldn't have gone better. The crowd was behind him, and I was somewhat surprised by the result. I mean, if I had to pick, I believe I picked Uriah Hall, but it was a really, really good victory for this young Australian fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And Don Wilson, same question to you, sir. The judges, they scored a unanimous decision for Whittaker, and I guess you couldn't really argue with that, could you?
No, it did start off. Whittaker pushed the pace. I picked Hall to win, and I was quite surprised with the way the fight went. Whittaker kept up the pace, kept on him, just didn't really give him any sort of distance. And it wasn't till the end of the kind of third round that Hall actually started to look like the fighter we know him as. But yeah, it was a really good performance by Whittaker. I
mean, we've seen this from Hall before. Maybe he sort of struggled to pull the trigger. Like you said, in the sort of previous fights. Do you think, Don, that he suffered the same fate here in this fight?
Yeah, that's kind of you get that sometimes when you hear people talking about Hall. He's like, he just doesn't seem to kind of want to pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. When he does pull the trigger, he looks great. Mm-hmm. But up until that point, he just obviously being a counter-puncher, he just seems to coast sometimes. Yeah,
it looks like he's sometimes lost in the moment a little bit as well. Let's move on to the next matchup. It was a rematch of the heavyweights Mark Hunt and Bigfoot Silva, and obviously in that first fight we had that spectacular draw. Absolutely outstanding. Billed as one of the best heavyweight fights of all time. The rematch, well, it was all over pretty quickly, really, wasn't it? Don, I'll start with you this time, sir. Like I said, they didn't really live up to anywhere near the first contest, but a knockout nonetheless for the Super Samoan.
Yeah, different fight this time. I thought Bigfoot looked off in this fight. I don't know if I'm just drawing a blank in his other fights, but just something didn't seem right. He kind of plodded along. He didn't seem with it, and then Mark Hunt obviously caught him. The equilibrium went, and the fight was over pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, what do you think? Did you think Bigfoot looked like the Bigfoot of old?
There seems to be something's happened since that, for me anyway, since that first fight. You had the Arlovski knockout, the Frank Mir knockout, he doesn't look like the guy that destroyed Overeem. You know, he doesn't look. Sometimes he doesn't look like he wants to be there, and that's worrying. If a guy's going to the cage, you know, and he's got that look in his eye. I don't know, Bob, what's your thoughts? It wasn't really much of a fight, was it? Literally just a simple knockout, but just your thoughts on how this contest went down, this short-lived contest.
I think I was really impressed with Mark Hunt, and you know, this is one of these, when we talked a little bit off air about the weigh-ins and how, you know, sometimes you don't really draw too much from stare downs during the weigh-ins, but during this weigh-in, Mark Hunt appeared to be very, very calm, even though Antonio Silva was a little bit imposing and you know, trying to really intimidate his opponent.
Mark Hunt was stripped and ready to go, you know, for weigh-ins. He was so relaxed, you know. He wasn't.
And he lost a lot of weight. Yep. He's under a new training camp. Yep. Now with Mike Swick over there in Thailand, and that really played, I think, a role in this fight. He looked great. Antonio Silva, undoubtedly, I think, is in the downswing of his career. You know, he's just not able to perform consistently, and I don't know whatever his role is going to be in the UFC. But the fact that Mark Hunt can win, you know, decisively, and he still has this knockout power, it shows you still, I think, that the heavyweight division is volatile. You know, there's nothing that says that that Mark Hunt can't come out and beat a couple more guys and get right in there for a title shot. It's going to depend on what happens next. The guy is, what is he? He's got to be 40 years old. Yeah. But he's still kicking, and he's still doing well, and he still proves that a heavyweight striker that can condition himself and can control his weight can be very effective in the heavyweight division. It's
a good question, though. I mean, where does he go next? You know, it's he's beat the guy. I guess I was going to say avenge that loss, but avenge the decision. He's got the W over Bigfoot. Where does the Super Samoan go from here?
Well, I think it's going to depend on what happens in the heavyweight division. You know, you've got some fights coming up. You've got Arlovsky fighting. You know, it's really going to depend on, you know, some of these other fights, what happens, and I would like to see him fight a top heavyweight in that division, or somebody close to the top. That there's, you know, you could put him up against a lot of fighters, even a Jared Rolsholt. Although I don't know, you know, Jared Rolsholt who fought on this card. I don't know if I would put him up against Rolsholt, but you know, you could put him up against Arlovsky. There's, you know, of course, Alistair Overeem, who I believe is set to fight Junior Dos Santos coming up. Yeah. There's a lot to really pair him with, because he's a knockout fighter, because he's going to draw ratings. Sure. Due to his fighting style, and that's very, very good for the UFC.
It makes for some fun matchups. What about yourself, Don? Who would you like to see Mark Hunt against? And I'm all about Bigfoot. Where does he go from here?
Yeah, well, I think Mark Hunt, I think he's sitting 7th in the heavyweight division, and everybody above him, they're all on win streaks. They've all kind of got matches set up. So it's maybe he might probably have to wait until there's a couple of fights kind of happened and then pick him up. But I could see him against Arlovsky. Josh Burnett's sitting one above him, but I hope he doesn't fight him, because I like both those fighters. I always hate to see favourite fighters fighting each other.
Conflicted,
especially
for sure.
When they're getting on in their career.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think basically what needs to happen is the people above him need to fight, and then just fling him in with one of them. I don't think he'll be a number one contender. I can see maybe Travis Brown or Andrei Arlovsky, depending on the outcome of their next fights. And Bigfoot, I can see him having maybe one more fight, but I think it was at TRT, he was kind of, obviously he's off it, but I think he had a legitimate reason for being on it.
Yeah, we've spoken about this a couple of times on the show. It's just it's so it's so complicated when it comes to him, because it appears that he has a legit case for using it, and that's where it's like, well, if you give it for this guy, and then what are the rules? Did the rules get bent at this point? And it just becomes as complicated as even just the whole Bigfoot situation is. Like we were speaking about earlier, it looks like he's no longer interested, and I wonder if that's a factor in this. Let's move on to the co-main event, gentlemen, which was the strawweight division. And we had Valerie Letourneau versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. 5 rounds, went to decision. I think the biggest thing for me to take from this fight was seeing just how tough Valerie is. I mean, she ate a lot of leg kicks, and she was still there after the 25 minutes. Don, I'll start with you on this, sir. What did you make of the women's strawweight title fight?
Yeah, I think everybody was surprised with Valerie. She put up a really good fight. Jędrzejczyk, I think, was it 150 headshots or something?
Ridiculous, yeah.
It was pretty brutal. But I think the leg kicks were the factor. It was an extremely high number compared to, I think, 9 from Valerie. It was, and obviously that front kick, I think, in the first round. Yeah. She caught her right in the face, and then she as soon as that happened, she didn't look interested. She turned to walk away, but I think when Jędrzejczyk engaged, it brought her back into the fight. So I don't know what would have happened if she'd just left her for a few seconds and swarmed on her.
That's true, yeah.
But I don't know that Jędrzejczyk, she never looked as if she was like in a high gear. She just looked like a sparring session for her. She was just kind of cruising, obviously flying loads of shots, but just never looked as if she wanted to go into the kind of high gear.
Mm-hmm. And I guess you would be ill-advised to sort of engage with Joanna. Perhaps that was a game plan, but I do remember that. Yeah, her getting in the face, and it was almost like she physically just wanted to, turn away and just kind of reset in her mind. But yeah, her stance, her whole demeanour just seemed like almost like she was, fighting underwater a little bit at times. Bob, what about yourself? Joanna, it was later revealed she had a broken hand, but it didn't seem to stop her throwing it throughout the contest. What did you make of the fight, sir?
I was really intrigued after the first round, or during the first round, when Valerie got the takedown on Joanna, because I just haven't seen Joanna get taken down all that often. Her takedown defense is spectacular, and from that point on, I really thought that it was a fight that anybody could win. It was a very, very close fight, but as the fight sort of progressed, it became apparent that Valerie, although very, very tough, and she lasted longer, she made it more of a competitive fight than I think anybody really expected. It just became apparent that she's just not going to be able to mount the offense to really outpoint the champion, who really proved that she is a great champion, because we're going to talk about the main event soon. She handled the adversity. She really, really was able to really dig deep inside herself and go and beat a very, very tough fighter. I was disappointed because I wanted to see Valerie get the takedown more. I wanted to see this be a more scrappy fight, but nonetheless, it was a great fight. And what's going to happen next for Joanna? Obviously, Claudia Gadelha comes to mind. Mm-hmm. She was there watching this, and they had fought earlier. In their careers, with Joanna winning a very, very close decision. Yep. And so there's that. There's potentially other fights for her, but it was a very, very good fight, very, very good night, and it made for it definitely added to the card for sure. Yeah.
Well, finally we get to the main event, Rousey versus Holm. And we had everyone talking about this, from Donald Trump, even the mainstream press here in Britain. It's unusual for them to cover UFC. It was billed as the judoka versus the boxer. We all know the story, the striking skills of Holm and stuff like that, but they certainly were illustrated to like an amazing effect. Not to mention footwork and grappling defense. And well, enough about my amateur opinion. I'll start with Don Wilson on this one. I'd like to get your thoughts, not just on the shocking result, Don, but what you made of the overall contest.
Yeah, I thought Holly looked great in the fight. She came out. She was obviously the game plan is let Rousey